We are honored to have Mr. Subramanian Chidambaran, Chief Strategy Officer, Cummins India. Mr. Subramanian has led the strategy function for Cummins India since March 2021. In this role, he is responsible for identifying and driving strategy opportunities that help achieve the vision for Cummins India. He steers the company's future roadmap with a focus on Cummins Destination Zero strategy for zero carbon emissions. He also spearheads the electrolyzer strategy and supports the new power strategy, including batteries and energy storage solutions. Prior to joining Cummins, he has led the strategy and digitalization for the distribution business of Siemens Limited for nearly 5 years and took care of global strategy projects, cost reduction programs, portfolio digitalization, process excellence, and more. Before that, he worked at McKinsey and Siemens Management Consultants for over 6 years. He was also part of the team that developed the McKinsey report on India from poverty to empowerment. Today, Mr. Subramanian will talk about global leadership in energy transition as his focus area for the discussion.
The first question, so I just have a few slides where just wanted to touch upon a few aspects of the energy transition. So the first question that we need to always ponder upon is why is this energy transition really happening? Now we all keep hearing of the story of, or we know about the reason, the driver about climate change, decarbonization, having the different nations having taken various goals on reaching zero carbon. But that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, which we need to really understand about this entire energy transition landscape, is about the economic aspect of energy transition. Let's take an example of a country like India. A majority of our energy is imported today. Probably more than 80% of our energy is imported into the country. India is at the cusp of economic growth and is touted as the fastest growing economy globally. Now, with the kind of exponential economic growth that India is going to foresee over the next years, it is a natural, obvious extension that this is going to lead to an explosion of energy demand, right? With any kind of economic growth, the energy consumption really goes up. The energy demand just exponentially keeps growing. Now, if you talk about the kind of imports that we are doing in terms of energy and the kind of energy demand that is increasing, this is going to be a severe strain on the financial budget of the country if we were to continue the way we are doing today. This is exactly the space where the government comes up or has spoken about energy security. It has spoken about Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's spoken about Make in India. All of this focused a lot around how do I ease the strain on the import bill, right? And this is exactly where import substitution is becoming a critical aspect for a country like India. Now, when you say import substitution for energy, most of our oil, we don't have so much of oil reserves so that we'll be able to draw from these and use for our purposes. So it means that the existing usage of oil, be it in the form of diesel, in petrol, in form of natural gas, and various other aspects, needs to get substituted by alternate forms of energy, which are indigenous. If the alternate form of energy is also to be imported, then it doesn't really make sense. So the whole question is about import substitution. That is, how do I substitute these oil or these kinds of energy imports with indigenous forms of energy? And this is where something like solar comes into the picture, because India is in the solar belt in terms of highest amount of solar radiation. Renewable has really taken off, especially the solar energy aspect. Solar is not available 24 hours of the day. Hence, you need other storage mechanisms to translate solar. And that is where we have battery coming up in a huge space and hydrogen that has come up in a huge way. So when you look at this entire landscape of why is this energy transition happening from the fossil fuels to fuels like hydrogen, battery, solar, this is the landscape that is happening in the background beyond decarbonization and climate change. That is a factor, no discounting of that. But we also need to understand that there's a huge economic landscape that is working behind this. Now, with this as a background, if you look at it, for any technology to get adopted, I primarily think that there are three aspects that really need to get going. The first is the technical performance. It needs, as a technology, needs to prove itself with respect to the incumbent. So if I'm going to bring in a hydrogen technology versus a diesel, it needs to prove that it can offer as good metrics in terms of performance, say for an automotive in terms of fuel economy, in terms of the mileage, in terms of the payload, all of this, as a diesel or a petrol would be doing, or the incumbent technology would be doing. The second aspect is in terms of the total cost of ownership. Does it really make, it's a great technology, but if I have to pay 3 times, what is really the benefit that I'm going to get by paying 3 times the cost? Right? So many of us have seen examples of this when people have to shift from a petrol or a diesel vehicle to an electric vehicle, right? When you go from the diesel bus into an electric bus, the kind of capex that goes up. So you need the total cost of ownership. So we need not look at it only from a capex perspective, but through the entire value chain or through the entire life cycle of the product or the equipment. Now, if the technology performance is great, the total cost of ownership is also viable, but the fuel is not available or the technology is not available for me when I need it, I will not adopt it. So, for example, a truck driver is driving through the national highway. He doesn't have any anxiety about his diesel or petrol going down and him just stopping at a petrol pump or a diesel station and refilling his truck. But for the new fuels, do we have such an infrastructure where there is no range anxiety, where the truck driver can just drive across, assuming that there would be a hydrogen pump available whenever his hydrogen refueling needs to happen, or a battery swapping or a battery recharging needs to happen? So this needs a lot of infrastructure. So basically, you need to have a product that is matching your technical performance. It is matching the economic or financial viability from a total cost of ownership perspective. And there is enough infrastructure to make it available and accessible. These, according to me, are the basic parameters. There could be more for certain fuels over the other, but at least the basic parameters for you to really get to the adoption of a particular technology or for a transition to happen. Now, we mentioned about the total cost of ownership. Like, for example, we could say that I'll buy an electric vehicle if it is cheaper, right? Or if it is cost effective. This could be the consumer viewpoint. The producer says, I will be able to make it cheaper if I get enough volumes or enough demand. And the demand comes only when you have a cheap product. So this becomes like a circular loop where the demand depends on the cost and the cost depends on the demand. And this is where this circularity is broken when you have someone like a government coming in and saying, I'm going to subsidize. I'll subsidize the demand, I'll subsidize the cost. Right? You have these various schemes that come up in terms of PLI schemes, the FAME schemes that we see around. But these are used to trigger or used to start off this entire cycle, but they are not there forever. We already saw that countries like India have, actually most of the countries have constraints on their budgets. They are not going to be able to fund these kind of schemes for eternity. So at some point of time, this entire circle needs to start being sustainable or self-sufficient. The government cannot keep pumping in money into these circles forever. So putting all this together, like for example, if I take a space like green hydrogen, what I felt is that there needs to be 8 aspects that really need to come together for an adoption or a transition to happen. First is it needs to start with smart mandates. It needs to start with smart policies that boost adoption and demand. I spoke about the schemes. There are certain mandates that are given for hydrogen in terms of saying that the refineries need to have 5% of their hydrogen to come from green hydrogen, etc., etc. So you have certain mandates and demands that help in boosting this entire demand aspect, consumption. Second aspect is accessibility to all the raw materials. So for example, if I take hydrogen, I need to have inexpensive green power, right? I need to have potable water that's available so that these are the ingredients that go into manufacturing of hydrogen for me within an electrolyzer. Then if I look at the third aspect, which is to say the best-in-class technology. So I have all the raw materials, but I need to have the best-in-class technology to make or to convert and bring it into the fuels. And this is where when I say access to best-in-class technology, you may not have, in a country like India, you may not have the best-in-class technology right away. Maybe the technologies are residing globally. How do you bring these technologies into the country? How do you incentivize these organizations to set shop here or to have licensing agreements and technology transfer agreements so that the technology starts to develop in the country At the same time, there are indigenous technologies also developing, and at some point of time, you make the whole technology aspect indigenous. But that is going to take a long time until this kind of a partnership or collaboration keeps happening with other countries or other regions. You need a thriving local supply chain that makes the entire process competitive. When I said TCO, or the total cost of ownership, it involves every line of the value chain needs to be cost effective. So when I take up something like hydrogen, right from the solar power and water that feeds into production of hydrogen, to the manufacturing of hydrogen, to the storage of hydrogen, to the distribution of hydrogen, to the refueling of hydrogen, and the hydrogen going into the truck or to the vehicle. Till that point of time, that entire value chain has to be optimized. That means every component of this value chain, you need to have a thriving local supply chain that makes it cost competitive. Access to low cost, efficient storage and distribution systems, as I just spoke about. So that reduces the overall cost of the final product. Understanding the safety aspect. So when you're talking about energy transition, you're talking about moving into different fuels. And many of these fuels have safety concerns, though they may not have real safety issues, but perceptions are also there in terms of saying that hydrogen is going to be disastrous, it's going to burst. Right now, even if such a perception is wrong or it's unfounded, the perception itself will not drive demand or will not drive consumption, because people will not be ready to adopt such a fuel if there are certain safety concerns that are perceived. So how do you address these concerns and how do you create better awareness? Talent. The moment energy transition happens, you are introducing a new fuel, you're introducing a new technology. You need to have talent who understands this, who knows about this. You have those required experts so that this entire value chain or this entire process keeps going. And finally, you can't expect that for every energy transition and for every technology, the sole source of funding is the government. So the government has to keep giving me funding for X, for Y, for Z, for A, and for B. This is not going to happen. So we need to find out we need to find out ingenious ways of funding, right? To say that what are the different methods in which I can garner funding, that I can support these various aspects. And this is where different financial partners, NBFCs, banks, and other institutions need to come together to say, how do we really do this? So this I just took as an example to say that if I take an energy transition into something like hydrogen, itself it involves so many aspects for it to ensure that we do this transition well and we are a leader, not just producing for our own economy, but also say exporting of green hydrogen to the world. So this is where I'll pause. And maybe during the discussion sessions, I can share more insights.
Thank you, Mr. Subramanian, for sharing your views on global leadership and energy transition.